Ladies and gentlemen, lend me your ears and your eyes. Diva Divine Light, live from Brooklyn, New York.
With no delaying for what you saying, yo. Said it with my 9 million with the dilly, yo. When I be on the mic, yes, I do my duty, yo. While up in the club, I be while in the studio. You don't wanna violate, nigga, really and truly, yo. My main thug, nigga named Julio, he moody, yo. Like a nigga that'll slap me with the tulio. Bitch, nigga scared to death, act fruity, yo. Fuck that, look at shorty, she a little cutie, yo. The way you shake it, make me wanna get all in the booty, yo. With no delaying for what you saying, yo.
Diva Divine Light.
Really my heart to me. Fucking seats what you got for me. Put more than kids with my eyes to see. Still $1 in the place to be. If you really my heart to me. Fucking seats what you got for me. Put more than kids with my eyes to see. Still $1 in the place to be. If you.
You're watching Diva, the Divine Light. A fun-loving, caring, passionate person who talks about sex, celebrity, and real-life issues, and even abuse. So hit that like button and make sure you share the show.
Really my heart to me. Fucking seats what you got for me. Put more than kids with my eyes to see. Still $1 in the place to be. If you really my heart to me. Fucking seats what you got for me. Put more than kids with my eyes to see. Still $1 in the place to be. If you really my heart to me. Fucking seats what you got for me. Put more than kids with my eyes to see. Still $1 in the place to be. If you really my heart to me. Fucking seats what you got for me. Put more than kids with my eyes to see. Still $1 in the place to be. If you.
Here comes the pitch, and it comes in wide. On the combo.
Yo, what's up, ladies? Hello, my beautiful ladies. Good afternoon. Sorry, I had to reschedule the time, but I had to go through some things as usual, mother duties. So how is everybody's day going so far? Good, I hope. Good. What's up, Candy? What's up, Nanya? Hey, Queen. What's up, West Coast? West Coast Bella. Cat Talk. Did you see the video, Cat Talk? You seen the bullshit? Like, you and Honey were out there. I cannot. The BS. Okay. Nanya, what's up, baby? How you doing, mama? How's everybody doing? I haven't seen you ladies in a minute. Well, I saw Candy and Cat the other day, but Nanya, Queen, and West Coast, how are you ladies? Haven't seen you in a minute. Everything good? Well, I wanted to talk about, you seen that, right, Cat? Okay. That was some real dumb stuff. I'm smoking on a doobie right now, y'all. I'm smoking on a doobie. You going to Mexico? I love it. Nice. That's just a little hop, skip, and a jump for you, right? It's not that far from where you at. It's far, pero tú sabes, it's not that far, right? Because you in Cali. So, I wanted to talk about, my title is speaking about a gentleman by the name of Robert Hadden. Now, he's a former gynecologist who sexually assaulted women, his patients from New York. He is a doctor out of New York who worked in New York Presbyterian Hospital and Columbia University Hospital. And these are two very, very prominent upscale hospitals in New York City. These are two of the best hospitals in New York City. My daughter went to New York Presbyterian Hospital when she was an infant. She was transferred from New York Methodist Hospital from Brooklyn to Manhattan to New York City to New York Presbyterian Hospital due to her bladder situation. Because in the hospital where she was born, they didn't have the proper equipment to examine her and do the necessity tests that were needed to help my daughter out and figure out what was going on with her. You're going to Michoacan? Okay. It's a 3-hour flight. That's not bad. That's good. Nanya had to stay away for a little while. You know, we all have to stay away for a little while. We all have to take a break every now and again. You know, we do. We absolutely do. So, I wanted to share some videos with you guys. I do not own the rights to any of these videos I am about to share with you guys. Okay. Excuse me. I do not own the rights to any of these videos. I'm just sharing this information as commentary to speak about Mr. Robert Hadden. This is for teaching purposes. This is fair use. Okay. Under the Copyright Act, the fair use of copyrighted material without permission is allowed when it's used for the following purposes, which is criticism, comments, news reporting, and teaching. And here we are teaching, reporting, and commenting on Mr. Robert Hadden's situation. I do not own the rights to any of this material. This is fair use under the Fair Use Act. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay, hold on. Okay. Now, guys, I want you guys to let me know if if you guys can hear the video or not, because I'm going to see if I can go on mute and still share the audio. The last time I had complications with it. So let's see if this works out. All right, so I'm going to go on mute and I'm going to play the video. When I start playing the video, let me know, guys, okay, if you can hear it.
Attention former patients, Dr. Robert Hadden. Dr. Hadden has been charged with assaulting his female patients. The U.S. attorney calls Hadden a predator in a white coat. The indictment alleges the doctor inappropriately fondled patients and engaged in medically irrelevant sexual conversation. Any patient of Dr. Hadden's in the past 25 years who was subjected to any kind of misconduct may be entitled to substantial compensation. Call our law firm abuse helpline now.
Dr. Jen Joy. Let's talk about this. Robert Hadden, who is a former OBGYN at Columbia University, is on trial, pleading not guilty for a rare but devastating type of sexual misconduct. We're talking between patient and doctor.
And this highlights the importance of understanding the boundaries that need to be adhered to in the exam room. As an OBGYN, what are those boundaries that we need to talk about, and what do patients need to understand and be informed?
This is such a tragic but important story for women and men to pay attention to. I went to Columbia Medical School when Dr. Hadden was a practicing OBGYN at Columbia Medical Center. And I was taught, as every healthcare professional and provider is, the proper way, not only out of sensitivity and respect for the patient, but legally the proper way to physically examine a patient. And of course, this story is really talking about GYN exams, one of the most intimate, anxiety-producing exams for women. And really, in the rare cases, how wrong it can go. And I think when women hear this headline, they need to understand that there's a right way and there is absolutely a wrong way to examine a patient. And knowing that ahead of time is really important. So, let's go through it. First of all, physical exams. Ideally should be explained and undertaken only with a patient's consent. It might seem obvious, it might seem redundant, but that is the way it should be done. Draping with, towels or robes or medical drapes, surgical drapes should be used to minimize the patient's exposure, and again, out of respect, so they're not left stark naked in a vulnerable position. Healthcare providers should absolutely make chaperones available to be in the room with a physical exam. I have never, in my almost 20-year medical career, examined a patient without a chaperone in the room, ever. That's for the patient's protection, and it's also for the healthcare provider's protection. And patients should absolutely be offered the opportunity to ask any questions or to interrupt or stop the physical exam at any time if they feel uncomfortable.
And what would you say to women who are watching this, hearing this, and are very uncomfortable already with getting that exam, but now feeling even more anxious?
I would say two things. Don't let a rotten apple spoil the rest of the bunch for the many healthcare providers that do this properly and with respect every single day. And secondly, a GYN exam, if done properly, should take seconds, not minutes. So if something doesn't feel right to you, trust your gut.
Doctor, thank you very much.
GMA fan.
That was very, very important. Very, very important. Very important. When you go to a GYN exam, you should never be alone with the doctor. There's supposed to always be the assistant with the doctor. And if you feel uncomfortable about a situation, speak up and say something right then and there. Don't let it slide. Very important, guys. We're talking about a GYN. Like she said, don't let this one bad apple ruin it for the bunch. Because healthcare professionals are there to do their jobs and help you in whatever field of ailments that you're going through. They're there. They studied, they went to school to learn to take care of you in case if you are sick. So you can't let one bad apple ruin it for the bunch. And it's true with anything. Even if it's a woman. Even if it's a woman, Nanya, there should always be an assistant in the room. Even if it's the doctor and his student. It doesn't necessarily have to be the doctor and his assistant. It could be the doctor and his student. But there should always be someone there. Hey, Karen, how are you, mama? Hey, Queen. You know,
major settlement to Manhattan is victims of sex abuse at the hands of their gynecologist. Columbia University Irving Medical Center and New York Presbyterian settling for $165 million. Dr. Robert Hadden was convicted in state court of criminal sex abuse charges in 2016, but was not sentenced to prison. He's awaiting trial on federal charges of abusing young female patients over 2 decades. Hadden has pleaded not guilty. The Manhattan DA is investigating Columbia's handling of the incidents.
You hear that? Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia University and Presbyterian Hospital are, what am I doing here? What's the email? What did you do? Okay, hold on. Where was the email? Hold on a second, guys. Okay. I have to send it to her, right? You're welcome. Sorry, guys. I had to help my husband out for a second. How you doing, Karen, baby? So you see the hospital, New York Presbyterian, as well as Columbia University, are responsible for paying these women because it happened on their premises. They are responsible for that. So they have to pay out $165 million in a lawsuit to these survivors. Isn't that something? Crazy, right? Now, the feds, they arrest the former gynecologist, Robert Hadden, who had avoided prison time for sex abuse under a deal with someone by the name of Cy Vance. Now, the gynecologist, he evaded prison time for allegedly, at the time, sexually abusing dozens of patients and was arrested on new federal charges, according to an unsealed indictment that was unsealed in Manhattan federal court. Now, Robert Hadden is a former Columbia University gynecologist, and he used his position as a doctor to convince women that repeated sexual abuse was medically necessary, according to prosecutors with the U.S. Southern District of New York. Now, the alleged abuse occurred between 1993 and 2012 at the University Hospital, okay, which is not specifically named in the indictment. All right. Now, among the 6 unnamed victims in the indictment was a minor. Now, Hadden himself had delivered as a baby, the indictment says. Okay? Out of 6 of the women, one of them in the indictment is a minor. And that minor, he actually delivered himself. He delivered the baby he abused years later. We're going to read this indictment, guys. So, Mr. Hadden allegedly used the examinations of his victims for his own sexual gratification, abusing dozens of victims over a nearly 20-year period. We got another R. Kelly on our hands, guys. Except this one is a gynecologist. He used his work to go and abuse women. The same way R. Kelly used his work to abuse women. Because he can. Because he thinks he can. These son of a bitches out here. Doesn't matter if you black or white, young or old. He did this 20 years ago. He is now in his 60s. Okay? Now it says that in a 20-year period, he did this, including multiple minor girls, and one of whom he had delivered himself. Now, federal prosecutors also allege that Hadden would repeatedly touch his victims' genitals and breasts for non-medical purposes while alone in the room with them, including licking their genitals. This is according to the indictment. Hadden would bring up sexual topics and ask detailed, inappropriate questions about his patient's sexual partners and activity. Now, during the conversations, he would make comments about their appearance or offer unsolicited advice on grooming. Now, the allegations show that Hadden acted as a predator in a white coat. And that's what one of the federal prosecutors had stated. Now, the federal authorities arrested, at the time, he was 62 years old, in Englewood, New Jersey. They arrested him in Englewood, New Jersey. Now, the charges came months after Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance, the Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance opened a new investigation because years ago he let him slide. We'll talk about that too. They opened a new investigation into him after a public outcry sparked by Hadden's no prison plea deal with Vance's office. So years ago, he took a plea deal. And Cy Vance, this district attorney, gave him a sweet little deal. And it was to lose his license and never practice again. And that was supposed to stop him from doing what he was doing in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. Now, all 12 members of the city council's women's caucus, the public advocate And 2 former patients have demanded that Vance resign because of his handling of the Hadden case and other high-profile cases against powerful men like convicted rapist Harvey Weinstein. Now, in January, Evelyn Yang, okay? She was a former cosmetics executive and also the wife of former presidential candidate Andrew Yang. Do you remember Andrew Yang, guys? Hold on one second. Okay, sorry about that, guys. Mom calls. So, as I was saying, let me go back. Now, if you guys remember Andrew Yang, he was the candidate who was saying that he would give certain households $1,000 a month. Remember that? Something he was promoting something. I forgot what it was, but it had to do with giving out $1,000 a month. And he was that president candidate. Come to find out, it was his wife. His wife was one of this doctor's victims. That's crazy. So the ex-presidential candidate, Andrew Yang, his wife, Evelyn Yang, okay, is one of this guy's victims. She came forward to reveal that Hadden had sexually assaulted her while she was pregnant. He assaulted her while she was pregnant, guys. Now, an activist, Marissa Hochester, had said, "I stand in solidarity with these countless women who stepped forward to share their truth about our abuser." Now, Marissa, she's an activist who is fighting to reform the Manhattan DA's Sex Crimes Unit, who has also accused Hadden of sexually abusing her. Okay? But is not among survivors in this indictment. So Marissa is not part of this indictment, but she was abused by this man as well. And she's also an activist. She's fighting to reform the Sex Crimes Unit in Manhattan. She says, I hope that through the course of this, the world will finally see the full extent of Hadden's decades of sexual abuse and the institutional cowardice that protected and enabled him for so long. She added in a statement, at a time when the world is focused on criminal justice, reforms, and the power of district attorneys, the Hadden story is a shining example of our flawed two-tiered system of justice. So, they're always complaining that it's injustice for the men. What about the injustice for women? Who come out and say something and nothing happens.
No, and then they get repercussions behind it.
Right. They get blackballed, they get backlash, they get assaulted, they get intimidated, harassed, called names. It's ridiculous.
Oh, this is so pretty.
Ridiculous.
This is so pretty.
Yes.
And it's really big.
It's big.
Oh, it's so close to the
Yes, it is. Now, she added in a statement that at a time when the world is focused on criminal justice reforms and the power of district attorneys, the Hadden story is a shining example of our flawed two-tiered system of justice, guys. Now, this federal indictment only puts into high relief the betrayal I and his other victims experienced by Manhattan District Attorney. A spokesperson for the district attorney, Danny Frost, said Vance's office had provided substantial assistance leading to the indictment. Vance's investigation examining potential failures by Dr. Hadden's employers and hospital to disclose additional incidents of abuse to our office and to regulators when required is intensely active and ongoing, Frost added. So, a spokesperson for Columbia University said in a statement that nothing is more important to Columbia than the safety of our patients, as we condemn sexual misconduct in any form. So, we commend the women who have spoken out against Robert Hadden and will cooperate fully with the U.S. Attorney's Office as the case against him proceeds. And the university spokesperson had added. So he's like, we're with you guys. We will back you 100%. We do not condone misconduct of any kind. And we will be here to prosecute him and support you. Now, Hadden, who hadn't worked at the university since 2012. So that means his shenanigans had stopped in 2012. And he faces 6 counts of enticing and inducing individuals to travel interstate to engage in illegal sexual activity. So here is a white man being charged with what? Sex trafficking. And what is sex trafficking? Also known as the Mann Act, right? Right. But I thought the Mann Act was only for black people. I thought that's what they used it for, right?
And then when I went like that, she stretched her leg out and put it on my shoulder.
Well, here it is. A white man, an old white man at that, being indicted for sex trafficking, aka the Mann Act, women and minors, because not only does the Mann Act and sex trafficking have to deal with minors, it also has to deal with women. Mama?
Oh, thank you, baby.
You're welcome, my love. So, love you too. So, you can traffic a minor as well as you can traffic a woman illegally. It doesn't necessarily have to be about minors. It's about women too. So, he faces 6 counts of enticing, inducing individuals to travel interstate to engage in illegal sexual activity. Now, each count carries a maximum 20-year prison sentence. Now, a lawyer for Hadden, her name is Isabel Kirshner, declined to comment, but added that Hadden planned to plead not guilty. So he pleaded not guilty. Okay. Okay, so now they're talking about, the prosecutors are claiming that the GYN was accused of molesting his patients and did so his entire career. His entire career, guys. And this was spoken about January 23rd, okay, of 2023. The prosecutors had urged a New York jury, okay, in January. He went to trial, and the prosecutor urged the jury to convict the doctor of federal sex trafficking charges, saying that he hid behind his white coat and the prestige of Columbia University to sexually abuse patients for decades. His defense lawyer countered that acquittal was appropriate because he'd already been punished for those crimes. Now, Assistant U.S. Attorney Jane Kim described the evidence against former gynecologist Robert Hadden who's 64 years old, as devastating and damning, as she recounted testimony by 9 victims, as well as 2 nurses who worked with Hadden during a career that stretched from the late 1980s until 2012. He donned his white coat and took the oath all doctors do to do no harm. And then he did the exact opposite, is what the attorney Kim said on Monday to the Manhattan Federal Court jury. She said that he tried to hide behind his white coat and the prestige of Columbia University as he won over vulnerable patients before sexually abusing them. Now, the defendant had a plan, a strategy, the attorney Kim said, and this wasn't a spur of the moment thing. She said he would ask patients about their sex lives and would conduct lengthy breast examinations that should only last 30 seconds to a minute on every visit for some women. Then, she said, he hid behind the cover of gynecological exams to keep pushing the envelope to see how far he could go. Now, the defense attorney, Catherine Wisencroft, agreed that what some of Hadden's patients endured at his hands was disgusting and horrible, and deeds that made it appropriate for a doctor to lose his medical license. The harm they suffered is real, she said, adding that we're not challenging what happened in the exam rooms. But she said his guilty plea to charges in New York State Court 7 years ago was for all of those abuses, and it would be wrong to convict him of the new charges based on those same crimes. Now, this is what his defense had said. Then, after that plea, Hadden of Englewood, New Jersey, surrendered his medical license, but wasn't required to serve any jail time. So this was a problem. They're trying to say that he pleaded guilty to charges years ago for abusing women, okay? And he surrendered his medical license, and that was his punishment. He didn't have to do any jail time. It's something kind of like what happened with Jeffrey Epstein in a way, where Alex Acosta gave him a sweet deal and said, listen, you know, you're going to go to jail, but you're not really going to go to jail. It's really a work release. You're going to go to jail just to sleep there and be out all day. All you're doing is going to jail just to sleep there. And you're only going to get a slap on the wrist for soliciting a prostitute. That's it. That's all. But yet, already like 20 girls had came forward to say that Jeffrey Epstein abused them. And they only narrowed it down to 2 girls, to soliciting prostitutes. And they weren't even prostitutes. These were 14-year-old little girls who were recruited. Now, his defense lawyer said that the sex trafficking charges require that Hadden knew that the 4 patients the charges pertain to were traveling over state lines and that he enticed them to do so because he wanted to sexually abuse them. So the defense has maintained throughout the 2-week trial, because the trial was only 2 weeks long, that Hadden wasn't aware of where his clients were traveling from or the roster of his appointments each day. So they're trying to say, his defense was saying that he didn't know the difference of traveling, of having these women travel back and forth, was sexually abusing the patients. He wasn't aware of where his clients were traveling from. He didn't know they were traveling from far distances to come see him for his roster of his appointments every day, or whatever day they had to come see him. So according to the indictment against Hadden, the doctor sexually abused patients from 1993 through at least 2012 while he was working at 2 prestigious Manhattan hospitals: Columbia University, Irving Medical Center, and New York Presbyterian Hospital. Now, the institutions have already agreed to pay more than $236 million to settle civil claims by more than 200 former patients. Now, his defense team during trial had asked the jury to acquit him, of sexually abusing nearly 150 patients. Now, among the former patients who have spoken publicly was Evelyn Yang, whose husband is Andrew Yang, who ran unsuccessfully as a Democrat for president in 2020 and for New York City mayor in 2021. Now, in 2020, she said that Hadden sexually assaulted her 8 years prior, even when she was 7 months pregnant. She had called the sentence in the state case a slap on the wrist. Now, in the course of all of this, Hadden has remained free on a $1 million bail since his arrest in 2020, guys. So he's been able to walk around free all this time. So there was a hearing. Let me see, when was this? This was February 2nd. Okay, so this article came out February 2nd about it. Okay. He was convicted. They found him guilty of sexually abusing hundreds of patients and was ordered to spend the next 2 months in jail as he awaits sentencing. And this is what the federal judge in New York ruled on Wednesday. So a couple of days ago, last week Thursday, on Wednesday, they had a hearing. Okay. And the judge ruled that, because remember, he's out on bail. So the judge is like, no, he can't. He's got to go sit in jail and wait for his sentencing. His bail is done. He's got to go sit in jail. He's got to sit in jail. So this is what the judge ruled on. Now, after hearing statements from some of the victims during the bail hearing, the U.S. District Judge, Richard Berman, shot down defense attorneys seeking to allow that Dr. Hadden remain free while awaiting on an April sentencing hearing. So he will be sentenced on these crimes in April. I don't know when. Maybe I can find out. Maybe I can go to his sentencing. Let's see. So, the judge says, I'm done and you're done. And this is what Mr. Berman was quoted by the New York Daily News as saying after Hadden's attorneys filed papers appealing the judge's detention order. So, yeah. Let's see. Okay, so he has been, all right, at Wednesday's hearing, the judge heard from 9 women victims, okay, that were victimized by the doctor, as well as written statements from 43 other victims, all of whom urged the judge to immediately remand Hadden into custody. And he had been under electronic monitoring and had been free on $1 million bail. But Hadden's attorney argued that he was not a flight of risk. Okay, but federal prosecutors urged that the judge to consider the severity of his crimes, regardless of whether he's a flight risk or not. Now, for Hadden's accusers, the federal case represents a second chance for a harsher punishment for the doctor, because in his 2016 plea deal with the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Hadden just surrendered his medical license but wasn't required to serve any jail time. So these women came back in numbers to destroy him. Now, Mr. Cy Vance, the district attorney at the time that gave him this sweet deal, defended his decision and said because a conviction wasn't assured, he argued his office sought a plea deal to prevent Hadden from practicing medicine and from victimizing additional women. So like I said, he thought that this was okay, because taking away his license will stop him and he won't do this anymore. So the victims aren't supposed to get their day in court and put this man behind bars for sexually violating them. Like, that's crazy.
Now, this pervy doctor, as we're calling him, is the worst kind. Not only is he preying on these women, he would go into the room with a nurse, leave the room, and then come back by himself so he can do these disgusting deeds on these women. And these women felt like they didn't have the power to speak out. It's disheartening and disgusting.
Now, Heather, I know you were anxious that you should have a stalker. And I'm sure hearing the Toya story sort of diminished you even further. For the record, you're cute enough for a stalker, but you don't want to get this kind of sort of interaction with your gynecologist.
Honestly, could you stop showing that guy's face? It's so disgusting. I'm gonna barf right now thinking about it.
Go ahead.
It's awful. It's just awful. I mean, and it was, as she was saying, it's so tricky. Like, Because when I first heard about this, I'm like, wait, aren't nurses supposed to be in the room? But he really, he was violating the nurse trust too, because he like snuck back in. And of course, the women were probably like, what's going on? They probably didn't even know.
Right. He might have, he might have had access to the medical. Now, we don't know what all happened, but these are all allegations at this point. But I can imagine a way he could see the medical record. Oh, a sexual abuse survivor, or this guy has some, but this is some good victim here.
Yeah, this guy seems like a sneaky pig, a disgusting pig, because a lot of these women, these victims, they all have the same story. So that's why I tend to believe these women, these victims. And you know what, Dr. Drew, there are reports before this. So why wasn't his license taken away prior? And I think it's so outrageous that some of these victims aren't allowed to join this lawsuit because of the statute of limitations. There should not be a statute of limitations in sexual assault cases, rape cases, because these victims oftentimes don't feel comfortable coming forward right away because of the stigma. So where's their justice?
I know. Jason, I'm going to get your thoughts.
Exactly. Exactly why they need to remove the statute of limitations on all sex crimes, period. Across the board, remove it. They need to remove it because it takes a while for a lot of us to come forward. It's never always right away. Never. There's a lot of shame and there's a lot of guilt within a victim or a survivor of these crimes. If you don't understand, you will never understand. You won't get it. But this is real.
I actually did a little bit on this on my radio show, and I got gynecologists to call in and tell me what they were really thinking when they saw all those different vaginas. And a guy called in and said that every now and then, if it's a good one, he's like, whoa, that's pretty cool.
Ew.
Which tells me to tell you, if you're going to have a vagina and you want it to be looked at by a doctor, make it a woman.
Yes.
We can't control it.
Now, for him saying some dumb stuff, I think that there shouldn't be any men gynecologists. It should only be women. How about that? He want to make some stupid remark like that. Saying, you know what? Well, if you want to be, if you're a woman, you need to see a woman gynecologist because a man can't control it. What? Then you know what? There shouldn't be men. Men should not be allowed to become gynecologists, period, because they can't control it.
These women want their children's birth certificates to erase the name of the doctor who delivered their babies. Why are they taking this extraordinary step? Because they say their OBGYN, Dr. Robert Hadden, sexually abused them. He's the same doctor who presidential candidate Andrew Yang's wife, Evelyn, spoke about last week in her heartbreaking CNN interview.
He proceeded to grab me over to him and undress me and examine me internally, ungloved.
Marissa Hochstetter says it happened to her when she was pregnant with her twins in 2011.
What was the worst of it?
I saw him at my 1-year postpartum checkup, and he undoubtedly sexually assaulted me. I felt his face on me, so it's something I will never forget.
Dana Solomon says Dr. Hadden also sexually abused her.
There were many questionable things that happened.
A new law that went into effect this month in New York City now allows parents to erase the names of the doctors from birth certificates if their medical licenses have been revoked for misconduct.
Wow.
C-section. So his hands were the first to touch my children. Seeing his name there on this document that is a tangible reminder of that is really hard.
Wow. So they want that name removed from their children's birth certificate.
We all trust that our dogs will have the best interest of our physical and mental health. But what happens when a physician breaks that trust? A recently unsealed federal indictment claims that Robert Hadden, MD, a gynecologist from the prestigious Columbia University Hospital, sexually assaulted countless female patients over more than 20 years.
We first told you about atrocious accusations of sexual assault at the hands of an OB/GYN at Columbia University earlier this year. Tonight, that man, Robert Hadden, has been indicted.
The assaults happened between 1993 and 2012. Although other attacks may have occurred before 1993, they haven't been reported. Fortunately, Dr. Hadden stopped practicing medicine in August of 2012. In 2016, Hadden pled guilty in a New York state court to a third-degree criminal sex act and forcible touching. He's now waiting for a federal court trial on 8 criminal charges of bringing 6 women, including a minor, across state lines with the intent of sexual abuse. The Columbia University Irving Medical Center and New York Presbyterian, where Hadden also practiced, recently reached a $165 million agreement with 147 of Hadden's previous patients. This follows a similar settlement outcome in 2021 for $71.5 million that was distributed among 79 of the former gynecologist's past patients. Victims of Dr. Hadden between 1993 and 2012 may not have come forward with accusations for many reasons. They may fear retaliation or social repercussions. They may want to avoid revealing their assault in public. Or they may worry that it's already too late to file legal action. While it's true that victims of sexual abuse only have a limited amount of time to file legal action against their abuser, the New York Adult Survivors Act offers a 1-year window for survivors of sexual violence to prosecute their perpetrators and employers, regardless of an expired statute of limitations. The window opens 6 months after the Adult Survivors Act's effective date and stays open for 1 year. This gives survivors time to take advantage of this unique opportunity to take action to file their legal claims. This window opens on November 24, 2022 and closes on November 24, 2023. If Hadden sexually assaulted you, but the statute of limitations prevented you from pressing charges, the Adult Survivors Act offers an opportunity for you to join the women who have spoken out against Hadden's gross sexual misconduct. More than 200 women have alleged that Dr. Hadden sexually assaulted them during a medical examination. Together with last year's settlement, 228 women have already received settlement money. In the aftermath of a sexual assault, you may not be able to think clearly or focus on filing a sexual abuse claim on your own. That's why you need a compassionate and objective law firm that specializes in sexual abuse litigation to manage the legal complexities of a lawsuit. If you are a former patient of Dr. Hadden during your examinations, you may be eligible to receive significant damages. Contact the team at Herman Law to get the justice you deserve. Our team of dedicated sexual assault attorneys is well-versed in claims against hospitals and healthcare providers. We focus exclusively on representing those who suffered sexual abuse nationwide. Visit us online at hermanlaw.com or call us at 888-294-1336.
Listening to that little clip right there made me think about Susan Loggins. Well, we deal with sexual abuse cases, and if you have been sexually abused by R. Kelly, give me a call. We will help you. And she didn't help nothing. You know, I still think that lady was wrong, And I think she should have convinced those girls to press charges against him instead of doing settlements. That was just disgraceful. Okay.
I sat there thinking this oncologist, much more training and education than most doctors I see. I knew it felt uncomfortable, but I should trust him.
Ellen Cater, Gabby Vasquez, and Julie Orsatti all say they went to see Dr. James Heaps because they were told he was the very best.
You were going to him how frequently?
Every 4 months, every 3 months. He kept giving me diagnoses that scared me. I never walked out of that office without crying.
I was also told I could get cancer and die, and since seeing another gynecologist, I've learned I'm not at high risk. He put fear in me to guarantee that I would keep coming back every few months.
Can you describe what he did? I know it's difficult to talk about the details.
He had his hands all over my body.
Using his entire hand, the palm of his hand all over, lingering for too long, and looking and telling me that my breasts were beautiful.
Vasquez, a medical assistant at UCLA Health, says she expressed concern to Dr. Heaps during her exam when he directed the chaperone to leave.
Another doctor.
He was introducing the ultrasound as if he was simulating as he was having sexual intercourse with me. And I said, this is not okay. This is not right. I immediately went to my supervisor and I reported this to her, and nothing was done.
Vasquez says she told her supervisor in January of 2017, but it wasn't until another patient's complaint in December of that year that UCLA began an internal investigation. And these were not the first complaints against Heaps.
We are now aware that at least as of 2014, there were allegations of sexual misconduct with patients by Dr. Heaps. There was not further action taken with regard to that.
UCLA Health says it is looking into the handling of
You see, this is another doctor in UCLA, another gynecologist who's abusing his patients. It is not safe out there, ladies. Not even with your own healthcare professional. We have to be careful. This is crazy. What the hell is going on in this world? What? These doctors are supposed to be professional and take care of you. What do you mean he's touching my body in ways he's not supposed to? And if you're going to the GYN for the first time, you don't know what to expect. So you're going to assume that when you're being examined, he's doing his job. Right, that creep is... Right. That is creepy as fuck. I would have stabbed him by now. Like, what do you do in that moment? If you've never been to the GYN and this is your first time going to the GYN, you know, you're not going to know what to expect. You're just going to think he's feeling your breast the way he's supposed to be. You're thinking he's digging in your coochie the way he's supposed to be digging in your coochie. You're not thinking he's fondling you and he's catching a hard-on and he's getting all excited. You don't think that these things are popping off. And thank you, ladies, for joining. What's up, Justa T? What's up, Honey Bunny? What's up, Aisha? What's up, Purple Purple? What's up, Karen Johnson? I saw my girl Nunya and Candy and everybody else in the building. What's up, ladies? This is crazy. Our bodies are being violated by the people we're supposed to trust to take care of us. This is crazy. This doesn't just happen with R. Kelly. This happens everywhere, y'all. Everywhere. And I'm trying to see if okay, I was just trying to see if I would get in trouble. It doesn't say CC, so all right.
And now a disgraced former gynecologist convicted, luring 4 women to his New York office in order to sexually assault them. But the accusations against women. But he cut a plea deal on many of those accusations years ago. CNN reported extensively on him in 2020, including this from our late investigative correspondent, Drew Griffin.
Dr. Robert Hadden served no jail time for his crimes. He cut a deal with the DA's office in New York. Patients weren't told the OBGYN they were seeing had been accused of sex crimes. And in the weeks that followed, 2 of those patients would become his next alleged victims. Evelyn Yang was one of them.
You saw Evelyn Yang there.
I was dressed and ready to go. And then at the last minute, he kind of made him like an excuse. He said something about, I think you might need a C-section. And he proceeded to grab me over to him and undress me and examine me internally, ungloved. And at first, I was a little bit like, what's going on here?
And there was no one else in the room?
No. In fact, when I think back to most of our exams, I don't think there was somebody in the room. Yeah.
You thought to yourself, this isn't just inappropriate banter. This is much different.
Oh, at that moment, I knew it was wrong. I mean, I knew I was being assaulted.
Hadden will be sentenced in April. He was convicted on 4 counts and each carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. And Evelyn Yang is here now, as well as our chief political correspondent, Dana Bash, who really brought this to light, all 3 of you guys. So thank you very much for being here. Evelyn is also the author of the book, a kid's book about sexual abuse. So thank you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I know you barely slept. It's almost 3 years to the day that you sat down with Dana and that we were all stunned watching your story. To see the conviction, what does it mean?
Oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this day for a really long time. And I think it was such a victory for every woman involved. Every Hadden survivor, I think, now can rest easier knowing that finally this man has been brought to justice.
You were sitting in the courtroom when the verdict came down, and you were sitting alongside other victims.
Yes.
And the reporting from the courtroom is they heard, there were quiet sobs when
some loud.
Yeah, some loud.
There were a lot of tears. And I think we were just all holding it in for the duration of the trial, certainly, but even for longer. It's just this weight that we've all been carrying for a long time.
This was a really long fight for you because you worked really closely with what was Cy Vance's DA's office here in New York. and you were told basically we're going to take this guy down, you know, and
So she worked close with Cy Van's office, with the district DA's office. And they was telling her, oh, we're going to take care of it, and this, that, and the third, and blah, blah, blah. Wow. And
then there was this plea deal, and you weren't even part of the plea deal.
Right. And we
So
had
to
no
see
say.
this,
We had no say in what kind of plea deal he was taking, and in fact, didn't know about it until after the fact, until it was all done. And it was a disappointment for sure. And I think this is why we were all a little cautiously optimistic that the verdict would be positive in this case. And so we were all gripping each other literally very tightly as the jury came back in. And when we heard the words guilty, we all let out this collective sigh of relief and a lot of tears. Yeah.
Dana, let me bring you in, because it's the work you and our dear friend Drew Griffin, who we lost a month ago. It's the work you did to bring this to the world.
Well, it's the work that Evelyn and her attorney and all of the women who came out afterwards did. I can now say, Evelyn, I hope I'm not.
The courage of these women, I congratulate them. You know, it's hard to take down a person of power. It usually works when there's strength in numbers. So, you know, that's why it's usually hard when women come forward about someone in power when it's just one person. You know what I mean? It has to be a group effort in order to take down this powerful person. I mean, and even at that, it's still hard. So sad.
Breaching any confidentiality, but I just want to say about kind of give you some insight about how this happened. I think it was Christmas Eve of 2019, and I'd met you in Iowa on the campaign trail, and you called me and you said, I just texted you a story, and I read the story about this plea deal that you're referring to, and you said, I am one of those anonymous women. I was assaulted by this man when I was pregnant. And we talked for a while, and you said you wanted to come forward, but it was understandably very hard. And I was taking the train to New York to do the interview, and it was touch and go, again, understandably, because it was so emotional. And it was one of the hardest things that I've witnessed somebody do, which is to go there and to bring back all of the trauma, real trauma that you experienced. And you did it. And you did it because you knew that this was important, not just for you, but for so many other women. And then, I mean, you correct me if I'm wrong, but since then, that was about 3 years ago. I mean, we just, with Drew Griffin's amazing reporting, our team, Nellie Black and Patricia DiCarlo, we saw woman after woman come out. How many women now that we know of
Hundreds
are survivors?
Upwards of
Hundreds.
350 women, right? And we believe that there are more. A lot of women actually still don't know. His former patients to this day don't know that he's a now twice convicted sex felon. And there's still work to be done on that front. Actually, Columbia and the hospital still has some work to do in terms of notifying previous patients. And, you know, every time I do an interview, more women come forward. And one of the first questions they ask is, how did I not know about this? Because he's now, he's been a known predator for many years. But I really thank you. I want to say thank you, Dana, and to your team for creating the space for me to come forward. As you mentioned, it was an agonizing decision. And I think you probably recall me canceling and rescheduling.
I may remember that, but that's okay. I understand.
But I have no regrets. I think the reason why I agonize over the decision is, you know, you just can't predict how the public opinion will treat you, especially women and minority women in cases of sexual assault. But I don't have any regrets, because as soon as I came forward, you know, hundreds of women felt at ease to come forward as well. And that in itself was a big deal. But the journey that led to this day and this verdict, I think, was a collective effort. You know, so many of the women who came forward after me became incredible self-advocates and advocates for others. And we were able to pass the Adult Survivors Act in May, which actually opens up the window for all survivors of sexual assault in the state of New York to file a case in court, no matter when the assault happened. So this will...
Congratulations and thank you. For getting the Survivor Sexual Assault Act. I'm so proud of you. Thank you, Miss Yang. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's much needed.
Will affect not just Hadden survivors, but sexual assault survivors, you know, everywhere.
And Poppy, can I just say one more thing, please, briefly? This is such a testament to the notion of sharing stories, even when they're hard, and what an impact it can have. And that certainly happened with Evelyn. It's also a testament to shoe leather reporting. And I just have to say that I hope that our late colleague Drew Griffin is smiling from heaven, that one of the many stories that he worked on it has had such an impact to bring what we want to do at the end of the day in our jobs, which is shine a light on things, and in this case, justice. And his reporting brought justice to Evelyn and hundreds of other women.
It really did. It is, as you know so well, Dana, the core of who Drew was to this world and to all of us. And we are every day grateful for what he did. Dana, you're reporting too. You told it in a way that only you could. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dana, Evelyn.
Thank you.
And now developing tonight, a former Columbia University gynecologist who admitted he sexually abused patients was just been found guilty of federal sex trafficking charges.
A Manhattan jury returning the verdict against Robert Hadden after less than a day of deliberating. CBS 2's Tim McNicholas live in Lower Manhattan with the latest. Tim.
Maurice and Christine, just this afternoon, U.S. Attorney Damian Williams described Hadden as a predator in a white coat. Patients have said that he assaulted them during what they thought were supposed to be gynecological exams, and that for years he gained their trust, lured them over state lines, and then abused them.
Day one, I was repulsed. He showed no remorse the entire trial.
Liz Hall says she will never find closure after Robert Hadden abused her, but she says today's verdict is an important step.
And when the first guilty verdict came in, I think what you heard were screams of joy.
Those screams came from Hall and other victims inside the courtroom. Hadden was a gynecologist who worked at Columbia University Irving Medical Center and New York Presbyterian Hospital. In 2016, he surrendered his medical license but avoided prison time on sexual assault charges at the state level as part of a plea deal. Today's verdict was for federal charges that he lured patients over state lines and abused them.
It hasn't fully hit us yet.
Hall did not testify in the federal trial because she says she lived in New York when she was abused, but she did provide a victim statement to the court.
I think we're all still shaking and crying and trying to wrap our minds around it.
Last fall, New York Presbyterian and Columbia University Irving Medical Center agreed to pay more than $165 million to 147 former patients who accused Hadden of assault. Evelyn Yang, who first spoke out in 2020 about the abuse she suffered from Hadden, called today's verdict a relief.
My name is forever tied to Hadden's name, unfortunately, but it's been very triggering over the years to see my name next to his, basically in every article. But it was worth it for today's outcome.
And a jury found Hadden guilty in all 4 counts against him. Each count carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. His sentencing is scheduled for late April. Live in Lower Manhattan, Tim McNicholas, CBS 2 News.
All right, Tim, thank you.
So the ending of April or the middle of April, he should be sentenced. I guess they haven't come up with a date yet. I'll see if I can follow this story. All right. And see when he will be sentenced. We'll find out how much time he gets. So on September 9th of 2020, the United States Attorney's Office announced the unsealing of a 6-count indictment against Robert Hadden, a former obstetrics gynecological physician, for enticing and inducing 6 victims to travel interstate to engage in illegal sexual activity. And the indictment alleged that from at least in or about 1993 up to and including at least in or about 2012, Hadden enticed and induced dozens of victims, including minors, to travel to his medical offices in New York, at least in part for the purpose of subjecting them to unlawful sexual abuse. Hadden was arrested and presented before the U.S. Magistrate Judge Robert W. Ledberger, who imposed bail terms of a $1 million personal recognizance bond and ordered Hadden confined to home detention. And the case is assigned to the U.S. District Judge Richard M. Berman. Well, as we know, it was assigned to him because the case is now, it's still assigned to him no matter what, but, because they have the appeal if he's going to appeal or whatever, and all that goes through Mr. Berman, the Honorable Mr. Berman. And at that time, there was going to be a pretrial conference that was scheduled in September 17th of 2020 at 10 a.m. Before the Honorable Mr. Berman for the Southern District of New York. And they had a proceeding that was going to be on a video conference. And the members of the public were able to access it through audio feed of the proceeding, and they had a call-in number at that time, and then they gave you an access code so you can, listen in. So the charges are contained in the indictment. His docket number is 20 CR 468 RMB, and I went to check out his indictment, so I got the indictment. Okay. Let me get the indictment out. Hold on. Let me make sure I have the indictment. Where is it? It should be here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So, the United States of America versus Robert Hadden. This was sealed, but now it's unsealed. The grand jury charges. As set forth herein, over more than a decade, Robert Hadden, the defendant, sexually abused dozens of female patients, including multiple minors, under the guise of conducting purported gynecological and obstetric examinations at Hadden's medical offices and at hospitals in Manhattan, New York. In particular, from at least in or about 1993 up until, including at least in or about 2012, Robert Hadden, the defendant, enticed and induced multiple victims to travel to his medical offices in New York, at least in part, for the purpose of subjecting them to unlawful sexual abuse. Hadden used his position as a medical doctor at a prominent university, the university, to make or to attempt to make his victims believe that the sexual abuse he inflicted on them was appropriate and medically necessary. Hadden encouraged his victims to return to see him and often directed his victims to schedule follow-up visits on timelines he set. As a result, some of his victims attended many appointments with Hadden over the course of multiple years, at which Hadden repeatedly abused them. As part and in furtherance of his scheme, Robert Hadden, the defendant, enticed, induced, and caused multiple victims to return to appointments with him to be further sexually abused. Knowing that in order to do so, many of his victims would travel to Hadden's office in Manhattan, New York, from or through other states. So the factual background. In the factual background, it says that at all times charged in this indictment, Robert Hadden, the defendant, was a medical doctor who worked at the university, and particularly between at least in or about 1993 and in or about 2012. Hadden was a practicing obstetric gynecologist, OBGYN, who maintained offices at university-affiliated hospitals and medical offices in Manhattan, New York. Between at least in or about 1983 and in or about 2012, Robert Hadden, the defendant, abused dozens of his patients, including multiple minors. Hadden did so through a process that entailed developing a relationship with his victims and causing them to trust him before engaging in a course of increasingly abusive conduct, which had an attempt to mask under the guise of legitimate medical care. In other words, he groomed them. He started to groom them. He had to groom them in order to get them where he needed to have them, right? Number 6, in particular, Robert Hadden, the defendant, typically used the following means and methods, among others, to facilitate his abuse. Although nurses and assistants were present for portions of Hadden's appointments with the patients, Hadden frequently created opportunities to be alone with his victims. Among other things, Hadden invited his victims to meet with him alone in his office, sent nurses and medical assistants out of the exam room for periods of time, and or intentionally failed to tell nurses and medical assistants when he was going into examination rooms so that he could be alone with his victims. Once alone with his victims, Hadden attempted to develop a rapport with them and put them at ease by asking them questions about their personal lives and telling them about his own life and family. During these conversations, Hadden frequently brought up inappropriate and medically irrelevant sexual topics without prompting from his patients. For example, Hadden asked many of his victims detailed, inappropriate questions about their own sexual activities and sexual partners. Hadden also offered unsolicited advice to some of his victims regarding such inappropriate subjects as how to groom their pubic hair and how to masturbate or have orgasms. In some instances, Hadden made sexualized comments about his victims' physiques. After developing or attempting to develop a rapport with his victims, Robert Hadden, the defendant, then began to engage in a course of physical sexual abuse of his victims under the guise of providing medical advice and or medical care. He did so by, among other things, engaging in the following conduct, which in the case of many victims became increasingly abusive over time. Hadden conducted excessively long and sexualized breast exams on many of his victims. In some instances, Hadden conducted 2 breast exams on a victim in the same appointment, conducting the second breast exam typically after ensuring that no one else was present in the room with Hadden and the victim. Some of these breast exams included, among other things, Hadden caressing or groping on a victim's breasts and pinching and twisting or otherwise manipulating a victim's nipples. Hadden conducted inappropriate mole checks on some of his victims, during which his victims were fully nude at Hadden's direction. Now, Hadden used these mole checks as an excuse to reposition a victim while she was fully nude and to touch a woman's breast, buttocks, and or genitals for Hadden's sexual gratification. When Hadden conducted a fully body mole check on a victim, Hadden ensured that no one else was in the room with Hadden and the victim. Hadden conducted pelvic exams on some of his victims, during which Hadden used his hands to touch a victim's clitoris, labia, vagina, and or anus without a valid medical purpose. In many of these instances, Hadden ensured that no one else was in the room with Hadden and the victim. On multiple occasions, Hadden conducted pelvic exams on victims, during which Hadden licked a victim's vagina, When Hadden licked a victim's vagina, he ensured that no one else was in the room with Hadden and the victim. This man is disgusting. These are the things that he did. This is sick. And this is the things he's doing to his patients. Women and minors. And through this process, Robert Hadden, the defendant, sexually abused dozens of victims, including multiple minor victims, over many years. Those victims' experiences included, but were not limited to, Hadden touching a victim's breasts and nipples, touching a victim's buttocks, touching a victim's genitals, digitally penetrating a victim's genitals, and or licking a victim's genitals, all without a valid medical purpose. Robert Hadden, the defendant, frequently targeted victims who were young and thus unlikely to have much, if any, experience with OBGYNs prior to meeting Hadden. I knew it. He had to have been taking advantage of women who did not go to the GYN often or who were there for the first time. For many victims, Hadden was their first gynecologist. And for others, Hadden was their doctor during their first pregnancy. So in doing so, Hadden intentionally targeted victims who would not know what to expect during their exams with Hadden, or who were less likely to challenge Hadden when he made them feel uncomfortable. As a result, although some victims immediately identified Hadden's conduct as abusive and never returned, many of his victims continued returning to see Hadden, sometimes for multiple years. Before realizing that his examinations were inappropriate, medically unnecessary, and sexually abusive, to ensure that he could continue to abuse his victims, Robert Hadden, the defendant, took various steps to cause and entice his victims to return to see him. Knowing that certain of his victims would have to travel from or through other states to attend appointments with him, including appointments at which Hadden sexually abused those victims. Hadden enticed some of his victims to travel into New York from or through other states by using a number of means and methods, including but not limited to the following. Hadden selected how frequently and when a victim would have her appointments with him, typically directing the victim to schedule a follow-up appointment at a particular time interval, and thereby causing the victim to travel interstate for her appointments. In some instances, Hadden directed victims to return at shorter intervals that were inconsistent with legitimate medical care. So Hadden used access to birth control to entice victims to travel into New York for appointments. So, for example, Hadden would provide a victim with free birth control, thereby enticing her to return for future appointments to obtain additional free birth control. In other instances, Hadden would only provide a victim with enough birth control to last a few months and required the victim to return for multiple appointments in a single year in order to obtain more birth control. What a son of a bitch. He's using birth control like it's Tic Tac candy. Let me see what you guys are saying over there. Hey, T-Bam, what's up, lady? Okay. I'm starting to believe he saw his first cat as a doctor. Not one woman gave him any play. Sick. Hey, Top Notch, what's up, mama? All right, nobody's really saying anything. I hope you guys are listening. And for those who are listening and that are in the comment section of the video, please leave a comment and let me know what you guys think about this case. This man is sick. Like, what the hell? He needs his whole pee-pee cut off. Like, his hands need to be cut off. Like, what? Oh, God. It's terrible. Terrible. Let me go back to the document. So he's using birth control like Tic Tacs to lure these girls and women. Now, through conversations with the victims and the review of their medical files, among other ways, Hadden knew at the time he caused and enticed his victims to return that certain of his victims would travel from or through a state other than New York to attend their appointments with Hadden in Manhattan. So, individual victims. Now, among the dozens of victims sexually abused by Mr. Hadden, the defendant, were a minor female patient identified herein as minor victim 1 and adult female patients identified herein as victim 1, victim 2, victim 3, victim 4, and victim 5. In particular, and during periods relevant to this indictment, Hadden engaged in the following acts, among others, with respect to these victims. Let me take a break real quick, guys. I need something to drink. Give me a second. Okay. Sorry, guys, I'm back. Now, minor victim one. Minor victim one was a patient of Robert Hadden, the defendant, from at least in or about 2010 up to and including in or about 2012. During the entire time, minor victim one saw Hadden as a patient. Minor victim one lived in a state outside of New York. As a result, minor victim one traveled from out of state into New York for appointments with Hadden. Hadden knew that minor victim one traveled from another state to New York for her appointments. Robert Hadden, the defendant, knew that minor victim one was under the age of 18 at the time of her appointments with him, in part because Hadden had delivered minor victim one at birth. As minor victim one, this is the baby he delivered. He delivered this baby. He took care of her mother. And he delivered this baby, who is now a minor victim one. He delivered her at birth. And as minor victim one approached and entered puberty, Hadden repeatedly encouraged minor victim one's parents to bring minor victim one in for appointments with Hadden. And as a result, minor victim one traveled to New York for the purpose of attending appointments with Hadden on multiple occasions. What a son of a bitch. He's telling the parents, listen, oh, she's reaching puberty now? Oh, she needs to start seeing me. She needs to start seeing me. You know, we might have to put her on birth control. She got her period yet? Yeah. We could put her on birth control so that she gets her period all the time, 7 days, once a month, so she won't be irregular. And then eventually when she starts to have sex, she'll be protected. And her body will be used to it. She'll be used to taking the birth control. Sure, bring her down, please. Whenever you're ready, let me know. I'll make the appointment. Okay? Okay. Shame on you, you dirty bastard. Now, during these appointments, Robert Hadden, the defendant, repeatedly sexually abused minor victim one through a course of conduct that lacked any valid medical purpose. For example, during one appointment with minor victim one, after the nurse left the room, Hadden instructed minor victim one to position herself on her hands and knees on the exam table While fully nude, Hadden then purported to examine her vagina and vaginal area. During multiple appointments with minor victim 1, Robert Hadden, the defendant, conducted breast exams during which Hadden groped minor victim 1's breasts and pinched her nipples. During one appointment with minor victim 1, Robert Hadden, the defendant, conducted a vaginal exam during which Hadden digitally penetrated minor victim 1 and intentionally touched her G-spot. Then we move on to victim 1. Victim 1 was a patient of Robert Hadden, the defendant, from at least in or about 2000 up to including in or about 2012. Now, in or about 2005, victim 1 moved to a state outside of New York, where she lived for the remainder of her time as Hadden's patient. After leaving New York, victim 1 traveled from out of state into New York for appointments with Hadden. Hadden knew that victim 1 traveled from another state to New York for her appointments. After many of victim 1's appointments between 2005 and 2012, Robert Hadden, the defendant, directed victim 1 to return for her next appointment and provided victim 1 with instructions on when to return. As a result, victim 1 continued to travel to New York for the purpose of attending appointments with Hadden on multiple occasions. During these appointments, Robert Hadden, the defendant, repeatedly sexually abused victim 1 through a course of conduct that lacked any valid medical purpose. For example, in the majority of appointments with victim 1, Hadden conducted 2 breast exams. During the exams, Hadden pulled on and manipulated victim 1's nipples. Now, in or about 2012, victim 1 traveled from the state of her residence to New York at the direction of Robert Hadden, the defendant. Victim 1 traveled to New York exclusively for that appointment with Hadden. During that appointment, Hadden administered a vaginal exam, during which he licked victim 1's vagina. Now, victim number 2 was a patient of Robert Hadden, the defendant, from at least in or about 1993 up to and including in or about 2012. Beginning at least in or about 1997, victim 2 resided outside of the state of New York, where she lived for the remainder of her time as Hadden's patient. As a result, between approximately 1997 and 2012, victim 2 traveled from out of state into New York for appointments with Hadden. Hadden knew that victim 2 traveled from another state to New York for her appointments. After many of victim 2's appointments between 1997 and 2012, Robert Hadden, the defendant, directed victim 2 to return for her next appointment and provided victim 2 with instructions on when to return. Now, as a result, victim 2 traveled to New York for the purpose of attending appointments with Hadden on multiple occasions. During these appointments, Robert Hadden, the defendant, repeatedly sexually abused victim 2 through a course of conduct that lacked any valid medical purpose. For example, in the majority of appointments with victim 2, Hadden conducted 2 breast exams. Hadden usually conducted the first breast exam in the presence of a nurse, but he conducted the second breast exam when he was alone with victim 2. During the second breast exam, at each appointment, Hadden groped victim 2's breast and manipulated her nipples. Now, victim 3. Victim 3 was a patient of Robert Hadden, the defendant, from at least in or about late 2011 up to and including in or about 2012. Now, in or about 2012, victim number 3 moved outside of the state of New York, where she lived for the remainder of her time as Hadden's patient. After leaving New York, victim 3 remained Hadden's patient and traveled from out of state into New York for appointments with Hadden. Hadden knew that victim 3 traveled from another state to New York for her appointments. After many of victim 3's appointments in 2012, Robert Hadden, the defendant, directed victim 3 to return for her next appointment and provided victim 3 with instructions on when to return. Now, as a result, victim 3 traveled to New York for the purpose of attending appointments with Hadden on multiple occasions. Now, during these appointments, Robert Hadden, the defendant, repeatedly sexually abused victim 3 through a course of conduct that lacked any valid medical purpose. For example, during the majority of victim 3's prenatal appointments, Hadden conducted a breast exam on victim 3, with one exception when a relative of victim 3 was in the exam room. During those breast exams, Hadden groped victim 3's breast and touched her nipples. At an appointment in or about 2012, after victim 3's had given birth, Hadden squeezed victim 3's nipples to extract breast milk without a valid medical purpose. So this doctor's going around being creepy, touchy-feely, and being nasty, getting a hard-on. And this guy could serve 20 years for each charge. And that's just for touching her breast in a way he shouldn't have touched her breast. And you people are out here talking about que R. Kelly was undercharged? R. Kelly abused those girls physically. He abused them sexually as minors, little girls. Now, after victim 3 had given birth, Hadden squeezed victim 3's nipples to extract breast milk without a valid medical purpose. Like, he's just like, oh, let me just, oh, yes, oh, squirt, squirt, squirt. What the fuck? OMG. I cannot. Lord have mercy. Victim 4 was a patient of Robert Hadden, the defendant, from at least in or about 1998 up to and including in or about 2010. Now, during the entire period that victim 4 was Hadden's patient, she resided in New York State, but outside of New York City. When traveling from her residence to her appointments with Hadden, victim 4 routinely crossed into another state while traveling into Manhattan. Hadden knew that victim 4 traveled through another state to New York for her appointments. After many of victim 4's appointments, Robert Hadden, the defendant, directed victim 4 to return for her next appointment and provided instructions to victim 4 on when to return. As a result, victim 4 traveled through another state to Manhattan for the purpose of attending appointments with Hadden on multiple occasions. During these appointments, Robert Hadden, the defendant, repeatedly sexually abused victim 4 through a course of conduct that lacked any valid medical purpose. For example, during the majority of appointments with victim 4, Hadden conducted 2 breast exams. A nurse was generally present for the first exam. During the second exam, when a nurse was not present, Hadden groped victim 4's breast and manipulated her nipples. Now, during the majority of appointments with victim 4, Robert Hadden, the defendant, also conducted vaginal exams, including when victim number 4 was pregnant. During those vaginal exams, Hadden used his fingers to apply lubrication directly on the outside of victim 4's vagina. In or about 2010, victim 4 traveled from her residence through another state to Manhattan at the direction of Robert Hadden, the defendant. Victim 4 traveled through another state to Manhattan exclusively for the purpose of attending her appointment with Hadden. During that appointment, Hadden administered a vaginal exam, during which he licked victim 4's vagina. Victim 5 was a patient of Robert Hadden, the defendant, from at least in or about 2002 up until including in or about 2011. In or about 2003, victim 5 moved to a state outside of New York where she lived for the remainder of her time as Hadden's patient. After leaving New York, victim 5 remained Hadden's patient and traveled from out of state into New York for appointments with Hadden. Hadden knew that victim 5 traveled from another state to New York for her appointments. After many of victim 5's appointments between 2003 and 2011, Robert Hadden, the defendant, directed victim 5 to return for the next appointment and instructed victim 5 when on we to return. As a result, victim 5 traveled to New York for the purpose of attending appointments with Hadden on multiple occasions. During these appointments, Robert Hadden, the defendant, repeatedly sexually abused victim 5 through a course of conduct that lacked any valid medical purpose. For example, during the majority of appointments with victim 5, Hadden conducted at least 1 breast exam, including when victim 5 was pregnant. At some points with victim 5, Hadden conducted 2 breast exams. In or about 2009, during an appointment after victim 5 had given birth, Hadden conducted a breast exam and squeezed victim 5's nipples to extract breast milk without a valid medical purpose. Now, count 1, enticement and inducement to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. So the grand jury further charges the allegation contained in paragraphs 1 through 34 of this indictment are repeated and realleged as if fully set forth within. From at least in or about 2010 up to and including in or about 2012 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, the defendant knowingly did persuade, induce, entice, and coerce an individual to travel to interstate and foreign commerce, to engage in sexual activity for which a person can be charged with a criminal offense and attempted to do the same, to wit, Hadden persuaded, induced, enticed, and coerced minor victim 1 to travel the world. I'm sorry, wait. I lost my spot. Okay. And coerce an individual to travel in interstate and foreign commerce to engage in sexual activity for which a person can be charged with a criminal offense, and attempted to do the same, to wit, Hadden persuaded, induced, enticed, and coerced minor victim 1 to travel to New York, from another state on multiple occasions with the intention that Hadden would engage in one or more sex acts with minor victim 1 in violation of New York Penal Law, Section 130.52 and 130.55. Title 18, United States Code, Section 2422A and 2. Count 2, enticement and inducement to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. The grand jury further charges the allegations contained in paragraphs 1 through 34 of this indictment are repeated and realleged as if fully set forth within. From at least in or about 2005 up to and including in or about 2012 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Robert Hadden, the defendant, knowingly did persuade, induce, entice, and coerce an individual to travel in interstate and foreign commerce to engage in sexual activity, for which a person can be charged with a criminal offense, and attempted to do the same, to wit, Hadden persuaded, induced, enticed, and coerced victim 1 to travel to New York from another state on multiple occasions with the intention that Hadden would engage in one or more sex acts with victim 1 in violation of New York Penal Law, Section 130.52, 130.55, and 130.40. Title 18, United States Code, Section 2422A and 2. You okay? Let's see what you guys are talking about here. Okay, guys, I'm back. Sorry about that. So count 3 is enticement and inducement to travel to engage in illegal sex acts. So the grand jury further charges that the allegations contained in paragraphs 1 through 34 of this indictment are repeated and re-alleged as if fully set forth within. So from at least in or about 1997 up to and including in or about 2012 in the Southern District of New York and elsewhere, Robert Hadden, the defendant, knowingly did persuade, induce, entice, and coerce an individual to travel in interstate and foreign commerce to engage in sexual activity for which a person can be charged with a criminal offense, and attempted to do the same, to wit, Hadden persuaded, induced, enticed, and coerced victim 2 to travel to New York, from another state on multiple occasions with the intention that Hadden would engage in one or more sex acts with victim 2 in violation of the New York Penal Law 130.52 and 130.55. The Title 18 United States Code, Sections 2422A and 2. So basically, these are going to repeat over and over again. So it's all about each and individual victim for enticement and inducement to travel to engage in sexual acts. Okay, all the way up to count 6. Okay. So this indictment was done by the United States Attorney Audrey Strauss. So he's got 6 counts of enticement and inducement to travel to engage in illegal sexual acts. And he was just found guilty of all 6 counts. So that is the end of that. And he will be sentenced in April. Now, you see how he was charged with inducing, enticing to travel, to make the girls travel from out of state to New York. See how they use the Mann Act? For sex trafficking. And he didn't actually have sex with these women. He just did illegal sexual misconduct acts. He did illegal sexual acts, is what they're calling it. And this man has just got convicted. And he's about to be sentenced. 6 counts that could carry 20 years each count. Maximum 20 years for each count. Two times 6 is how much, guys? $12, right? So that means that this man could get 120 years just for feeling up on breasts and playing with nipples and sticking his hands inside vaginas he shouldn't have done, acting like he was doing work and he was just feeling up on women, being a creep. Well, guys, that's the end of my live. I need y'all to let me know what you think about this gynecologist and his antics. Let me see something. Okay, before I leave, let me see if. Okay.
Evelyn Yang has a story.
Okay. I'm gonna leave you guys with Evelyn Yang, and she reveals how she was sexually assaulted while she was pregnant. So let me just share this with y'all. I'm gonna take you guys out with this one video. Okay.
So secret, she never even shared it with most of her family. Evelyn Yang has a story so secret, she never even shared it with most of her own family. But spending time with her husband, presidential candidate Andrew Yang, on the campaign trail and hearing so much gratitude from voters for talking about son Christopher's autism made her feel newly empowered.
Meeting people and seeing the difference that we've been making already has moved me to share my own story about it, about sexual assault.
It was 2012. She was pregnant with their first baby and found an OBGYN who had a good reputation, Dr. Robert Hadden. Initially, she says her visits were routine, but after a few months, things changed.
It started with inappropriate questions around how intimate I was with my husband, sexual activity, just very inappropriate, probing questions that were unrelated to my health. The examinations became longer, more frequent, and I learned that they were unnecessary most of the time. Most women don't know what you're supposed to get when you're pregnant. I didn't know that you're not supposed to get an exam every time you went to see the doctor. I feel like I put up with some inappropriate behavior that I didn't know at the time was straight up sexual abuse / sexual assault until much later. And I regret having put up with that because it ended up in a sexual assault that was indisputable, quite blatant.
Yang says the worst assault happened when she was 7 months pregnant.
I was in the exam room and I was dressed and ready to go. And then at the last minute, he kind of made up like an excuse. He said something about, I think you might need a C-section. And he proceeded to grab me over to him and undress me and examine me internally, ungloved. And at first, I was a little bit like, what's going on here?
And there was no one else in the room?
No. In fact, when I think back to most of our exams, I don't think there was somebody in the room. Yeah.
You thought to yourself, this isn't just inappropriate banter. This is much different.
Oh, at that moment, I knew it was wrong. I knew I was being assaulted.
She says she thought she was the kind of person who would run away, but she couldn't.
I imagined myself as someone being, like I would throw a chair at him and run out yelling bloody murder. It's not what happened. I was confused, and then I realized what was happening, and then I just kind of froze. Like a deer in headlights, just frozen. I knew it was happening. I remember trying to fix my eyes on a spot on the wall and just trying to avoid seeing his face as he was assaulting me. Was it just waiting for it to be over?
she left that day and never went back.
Did you tell your husband, Andrew?
No, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I didn't tell Andrew or my family because I didn't want to upset them. I thought, this happened to me. I can process this. I can deal with it. I can compartmentalize it. And
did you?
I tried, but I just didn't want to affect others. And I certainly didn't want Andrew blaming himself for not being able to go with me to these doctor's visits, because honestly, if he was with me in the room, if anyone was with me in the room, this obviously wouldn't have happened. And at the time, he was traveling a lot for his nonprofit, and most of the scheduling just didn't work out.
Many months later, after her baby was born, a letter came in the mail. Robert Hadden had left his practice.
I Googled him, and there it was. There was a headline that said that he had assaulted another woman, and she reported it to the police. And at that moment, everything just stood still. It was this sense of relief, of finally realizing that I wasn't alone in it. He still picked me, but that it wasn't because of, it wasn't something that I did. It was, this was a serial predator. And he just picked me as his prey.
It was at that point she told husband Andrew.
I just needed to tell someone. I needed to share it at that moment because it felt so big to me. I needed that support. And I told him. And he cried. I mean, he wasn't bawling, but there were tears. Mm-hmm. And he said it's because he remembered when I came home one day ranting about pervy doctors. I said something like, why do they let men be gynecologists? It makes no sense. And he remembered that I had made this comment, and he felt so bad. He felt guilty that he didn't make the connection or ask me more.
She found a lawyer who discovered the Manhattan district attorney had an open case against the doctor. Several other women had come forward with similar stories of being assaulted by him.
And that was just life-changing. It felt so good to not be alone in this.
She worked with an assistant district attorney who was collecting information from 18 women, including Yang, with allegations against Hadden. Yang testified before a grand jury, which indicted Hadden on multiple felony sex charges.
Every time I talked to the ADA, the case was going great. And she was always telling me how strong this case was, how we were going to put him in jail, how he wasn't going to be able to do this to anyone ever again. And all of a sudden there was this drop-off. I didn't hear from her for months.
Finally, in February 2016, she was told the DA agreed to a plea deal with the doctor. He would lose his medical license, register as the lowest level sex offender, but not go to jail.
He was getting off with a slap on the wrist, basically.
Not just that. Although he was charged on 9 counts involving 6 accusers, he only pleaded guilty to 2 charges involving 2 women. Evelyn Yang was not one of them.
He pled guilty to, that the punishment would have been the same. So it didn't matter. And I thought, well, it matters to me for obvious reasons. And it wasn't until after Me Too and the Weinstein case came out that the victims in this case realized that we were betrayed twice. First,
that's how you feel? You feel that you were betrayed twice?
Oh, absolutely. It's like getting, slapped in the face and punched in the gut. The DA's office is meant to protect us, is meant to serve justice, and there was no justice here.
The office of Manhattan District Attorney Cy Vance is the same one that was lenient with Jeffrey Epstein over his registering as a sex offender and also initially failed to prosecute Harvey Weinstein. When asked for a response, the DA's office told CNN that obtaining a felony conviction was the goal in this case. And while we stand by our legal analysis and resulting disposition of this difficult case, we regret that this resolution has caused survivors pain. Though Hadden was not a big name like Weinstein or Epstein, Yang says he did have a powerful protector, Columbia University, which runs the medical facility where he practiced.
The fact that it's a name brand university behind this doctor and using their influence to protect themselves at the expense of the victims in the case.
Some 6 weeks before Yang says she was assaulted, police went to Hadden's office and arrested him. Another patient told police he sexually assaulted her and licked her vagina during an exam. The arrest was voided, and he went back to seeing female patients.
What happened to me should have never happened. He was arrested in his office, and he was let back to work.
Without anybody in the
without
room.
Without a chaperone. I mean, at the very least, the bare minimum would be to make sure that there's an aide all the time. And that's what's very painful, is knowing that actually what happened to me could have been prevented.
Yang's attorney says there are at least 32 women who now accuse Hadden of sexual assault. Most of them, including Yang, are part of civil suits against Columbia University, its affiliates, and Hadden. Among the allegations, accusing Hadden of aggressively penetrating and groping their bodies and genitalia, forcing them to strip naked, groping their breasts, digitally penetrating them, and licking their vaginas. The suit also claims Columbia knew about allegations against Hadden, received numerous complaints of serious misconduct, and kept the complaints secret to avoid negative publicity. The lawsuit is still ongoing. Hadden denies all the allegations against him except the ones he pleaded guilty to. CNN sent detailed questions to Columbia, including why Dr. Hadden was allowed to return to work after his initial arrest, but the university only responded that the allegations against Hadden were abhorrent and they deeply apologized to those whose trust was violated. Yang fought in court for more than 2 years to keep her identity anonymous, which makes going public now even more remarkable.
Why do you want to do this now? What do you want to accomplish now?
My personal life and this growing public life, they're not separate. And in this case, my experience with the sexual assault and then what happened, all that happened afterwards, is such a powerful and upsetting example of the truth that women are living with every day. And I just happen to be able to have a platform to talk about it. I need to use that voice. I feel like it's something that's an obligation, but also a privilege and a gift that I get to share my story now and also help other women. The process of getting to this point is very hard. You know, I haven't slept in days. This is very hard to come out with, but I hope it's, and I have to believe that it's worth it.
Okay, guys, so that was the end of that. That was the interview with Evelyn Yang. Please, guys, do me a favor. Let me know what you think about this doctor. Please don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Make sure you like this video. Share the video. Thank you very much. And don't forget to leave your comments in the comment section below, okay? Let me know what you think about this guy and what happened to him. And Diva Divine Light is out. Peace.